My name is Marcus Chen. I'm 28 years old, and I've spent the last 7 months not having much of anything. Stable income, routine, a reason to set my alarm. But on a Tuesday in late September, I got hired to work graveyard shifts at Sutton Logistics, a regional shipping warehouse about 40 minutes outside the city. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to relief. The relief didn't last long. The warehouse sat on the edge of an industrial park, one of those massive corrugated steel structures that you don't really see until you're driving straight toward it. 3 stories tall, windowless, except for the administrative section, with a parking lot that seemed larger than necessary. I arrived at 10:47 p.m. on my first night, 15 minutes early, which I thought showed initiative. Derek, my supervisor, didn't seem to notice. He was a man in his mid-50s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years inside buildings with no natural light. Pale, solid, with the kind of patience that comes from chronic indifference. "You're early," he said, not disapprovingly, just observing. He was standing in the break room, which smelled like burnt coffee and something else, something organic that I couldn't quite place. "Figured I'd get oriented," I said, attempting cheerfulness that sounded thin even to me. Derek handed me a clipboard with a timesheet and a laminated employee handbook. The handbook was maybe 60 pages, though I'd only realized later that it should have been considerably thicker. Entire sections were blacked out with marker, not redacted with any official stamp, just crude, aggressive marker strokes that obscured whole passages. It was the kind of thing that made you want to hold the pages up to the light, which I didn't do then, but would later. "You've got orientation tonight," Derek said, already walking toward the warehouse floor. "Then you'll start actual shifts tomorrow. Tonight I'm showing you the basics. Tomorrow night you're on your own. Questions?" I had questions, plenty of them, but I'd learned that asking too many questions on day 1 was a good way to seem like trouble. So I kept my mouth shut and followed. The warehouse interior was massive, in a way that photographs hadn't prepared me for. The ceiling disappeared into darkness 30 feet up, ribbed with industrial beams and threaded with catwalks that I couldn't imagine ever needing to use. The fluorescent lighting was uneven, clusters of brightness separated by zones of shadow, creating the impression that the space extended much further than it actually could. The air was cool and tasted faintly metallic, with an undertone of rubber and machine oil. My footsteps echoed differently depending on where I walked, which shouldn't have been strange, but it was. "Okay," Derek said, gesturing vaguely at the floor. "Main warehouse is organized into 9 aisles, A through I. Each aisle has 5 vertical sections: north, central, south, upper deck, and basement access. We receive shipments twice daily, process inventory, and prepare outbound loads. Standard stuff." He walked me through the layout with the enthusiasm of someone reading terms and conditions aloud. The aisles were marked with faded painted lines on the concrete floor, numbers stenciled at intervals. The shelving was industrial, gray metal, packed with boxes ranging from shoebox-sized to refrigerator-sized. Some sections were nearly empty. Others were crammed so densely, I wondered how anyone could extract items from the middle without dismantling the whole structure. What I noticed, what I kept noticing, was how the senior workers moved around the space. They operated in a kind of choreographed silence, avoiding certain aisles entirely, taking complicated routes to reach destinations that should have been straightforward. Nobody seemed to walk through aisle 7. I noticed this immediately because I had a good memory for spatial patterns, and I watched Derek guide me around the floor in a way that never took us directly there. He'd route us through 6, then cut toward 8, never acknowledging the gap. "What's aisle 7?" I asked when we were in the break room again, standing before a wall covered in schedules and OSHA compliance posters. Derek was refilling his coffee mug. He paused for exactly 2 seconds too long. Aisle 7 is stocked like any other, he said, not looking at me. You'll get familiar with the layout. Don't worry about memorizing everything tonight. It wasn't a non-answer, exactly. It was worse than that. It was a deflection so practiced that it felt like a brick wall. I did my first actual shift the next night. The warehouse was quieter at 11 p.m. than it had been during the tour. There were 6 of us working. Derek in the office, 2 loaders I'd met briefly named Joe and Travis, a woman named Yuki, who operated the forklift with mechanical precision, and a quiet guy named Ramon, who spent most of the night in the basement section. The supervisor for my shift was a younger woman named Patricia, maybe early 40s, who gave me my assignment on a printout, straightforward inventory work in aisle 3, counting and verifying stock against system records. I was halfway through my second hour, standing on a step stool in front of a stack of pharmaceutical shipments, when I became aware that something had shifted in the warehouse. The noise changed, not louder or softer, just different. The rhythm of the forklifts altered. I climbed down and looked around. The clock on the warehouse wall read 12:54 a.m. Workers who'd been scattered across the floor were now converging on sections I couldn't see from my position. Joe and Travis had stopped their current tasks. Yuki had parked her forklift and was walking purposefully toward the rear section. Even Ramon appeared from the basement access, moving with clear intention. They all seemed to be heading toward an area that existed in one of the warehouse's blind spots, a region I couldn't quite see from where I stood. Then the clock shifted to 1:00 a.m., and there was a sensation I can only describe as a held breath being released. The air pressure changed, or maybe I imagined it. The quality of the fluorescent light seemed to shift, becoming very slightly more yellow. The workers who'd been moving stopped simultaneously, stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, and then resumed their previous tasks as if they'd never stopped. I stood on my step stool like an idiot, holding a clipboard, trying to convince myself that nothing unusual had occurred. By 1:15 a.m., everyone was back to normal rhythm, and the moment was already starting to feel like something I'd misinterpreted. When I clocked out at 6:00 a.m., Derek was waiting near the exit. "How'd it go?" he asked, not really interested in the answer. "Fine," I said. "Uneventful." "Good. That's good." He paused, as if considering whether to add something. He didn't. "See you tomorrow night." As I was walking to my car, I passed Yuki loading a bag into her trunk. She glanced at me, made eye contact for a fraction too long, and then looked away. In that moment, I registered something in her expression. A warning, maybe, or sympathy. Like she was looking at someone who'd just stepped onto a path without realizing it was a path at all. It wasn't until I was halfway home that I realized I'd never found the back wall of the warehouse. I'd walked the entire main floor, climbed to the upper deck, checked the basement access points. The structure was 3 stories tall on the exterior, the dimensions clear from the parking lot. But inside, despite my spatial memory, I couldn't quite piece together where the back actually ended. It was as if the interior space was slightly larger than the exterior container should have allowed. I told myself I was tired. That orientation and a new job and 6 hours of fluorescent lighting had scrambled my sense of direction. But I didn't entirely believe it, and as I pulled into my apartment complex as the sun was rising over the hills, I found myself already dreading the next night. The handbook was sitting on my passenger seat, those black marker redactions catching the morning light like open mouths. I picked it up and tried, again, to read what was underneath the marks. It was impossible. Whoever had done this had been thorough. I should have quit that morning. I didn't. And by the time I returned to the warehouse the following evening, I realized that some choices unmake themselves the moment you make them. By my 3rd week at Sutton Logistics, I'd convinced myself that I'd misread the 1:00 a.m. incident. Stress, fatigue, the strange psychology of starting a new job in an unfamiliar environment at midnight. All of it conspired to make your brain see patterns where none existed. This was the rational explanation, and I clung to it like a life raft. But I also couldn't stop thinking about the handbook. The redacted sections bothered me in a way I couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't that I wanted to know what was underneath. It was that the act of redaction itself implied a kind of deliberate concealment. You didn't black out entire pages of an employee handbook because you were protecting trade secrets. You did it because you were hiding something you didn't want new hires to ask questions about. So I became obsessed with finding a complete version. The break room had a shelf where supervisors left manuals and compliance documents, and I checked it twice, finding only the same redacted handbook. On a Thursday night during my second week, I volunteered to reorganize the filing system in the administrative office, a tedious task that nobody else wanted. Derek seemed grateful and gave me access to the back filing cabinets. I found employee records, tax forms, shipping manifests, but no complete handbook. Every single copy in that cabinet was identical to mine, same black marker strokes obscuring the same sections. I asked Derek about it directly during a quiet moment near the loading dock. "So, the handbook," I said, keeping my tone casual. "The pages that are blacked out, is there a full version somewhere? I'm just trying to understand all the protocols." Derek was checking inventory on a tablet, and I watched his thumb stop mid-scroll. He didn't look up. "The handbook covers everything you need to know," he said, his voice taking on that carefully neutral quality I'd started to recognize. The sound of someone choosing words very carefully. "The redacted sections are procedural details that aren't relevant to your current position. You don't need to worry about them." "Right, but you'll get more information as you need it," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were a pale blue, and they had that distant quality that comes from looking at screens for too long. But there was something else there too, a kind of warning. "Trust me on this, Marcus. Curiosity about things outside your scope creates problems for everyone." It wasn't a threat, exactly. It was something more effective, a statement of fact delivered with the certainty of someone who'd already seen the consequences. That night, unable to let it go, I brought the question to Yuki. She was working the forklift, and I'd learned that she preferred to move cargo alone. The other workers gave her space, and she'd been at Sutton Logistics long enough, 3 years I'd heard, that Derek rarely checked on her work. I caught her between loads when she'd parked the forklift and was marking items off on a handheld scanner. "Can I ask you something?" I said, approaching her directly. She glanced up and I saw her shoulders tense slightly. "If it's about the handbook, how did you know?" "Because you've been asking everyone subtle questions for 2 weeks, she said, not unkindly. "And because I'd ask the same thing if I were you." Yuki was shorter than me, built lean from years of physical work. With dark hair she kept tied back and eyes that were remarkably alert for someone working graveyard shifts. She'd been polite to me, but distant, the way a person is when they've decided you're not worth getting close to. "The redacted sections," I pressed. "What are they about?" She looked around the warehouse, checking the positions of the other workers. Joe was 3 aisles over. Ramon was in the basement section. Patricia, tonight's supervisor, was in the office. We had maybe a few minutes of semi-privacy. "They're about protocols," Yuki said quietly, returning her attention to the scanner. "Things that happen here. Things that require specific procedures to manage." "What kind of things?" "Marcus." She set down the scanner and looked at me directly. "Do you like working here?" The question was strange enough that it took me a moment to process. "It's a job. The pay's decent." That's not what I asked. I considered the warehouse around us, the constant hum of machinery, the artificial light, the precise order of stacked boxes and neat aisles. There was something almost meditative about it once you stopped noticing the wrongness. "I guess," I said. "It's steady." "Then my advice is to stop asking about the handbook," Yuki said. She picked the scanner back up. "The less you know, the easier it is to work here. Trust me." "That doesn't make any sense." "No," she agreed. "But it's true anyway." She didn't say anything else, just walked back to the forklift and resumed her work with the kind of finality that said the conversation was over. I stood there for a moment, looking at her, and noticed something I'd never quite registered before. The tension in her shoulders never relaxed, even when she was doing routine tasks. She worked as if she was perpetually braced against something about to happen. I found the water-damaged handbook 3 days later. I was cleaning out the break room's lost and found, another volunteer task, this time because I thought it might give me another excuse to ask around about the handbook, when I discovered it crammed under a stack of forgotten lunch containers. It was warped and swollen, pages stuck together in some places, the ink of the printed text running in places. But scattered among the water damage and deterioration were small sections of readable text. I took it home. In my apartment that morning, after clocking out, I carefully separated the pages and photographed them with my phone. Most of it was unreadable, destroyed beyond recovery, but one section, roughly from the middle of the handbook, had been sealed away from the worst of the water damage. The pages were still wet, but legible. I found the passage that made my blood feel suddenly thinner. All items in Section C must be inventoried between 1 o'clock and 1:15 a.m. only. Under no circumstances should items from Section C be handled outside this window. Non-compliance results in immediate termination and forfeiture of final paycheck. Supervisors must verify Section C inventory independently. Any discrepancies should be reported to management-level personnel only. The rest of the paragraph was obscured, but there was more text below it, partially visible. Failure to observe Section C protocols has previously resulted in, and then it was gone, destroyed by water damage that seemed almost deliberate in its selectivity. I read it a dozen times, my hands shaking slightly. Section C. During the 1 o'clock a.m. synchronized moment, the workers had all moved toward a specific area. I'd assumed it was random, a projection of my own paranoia. But what if it wasn't? What if they'd been conducting the Section C inventory? That night, before my shift, I tried to search the warehouse layout I'd been given. There were 9 aisles, A through I. No mention of sections labeled by letter, but the handbook referred to Section C as if it were a known quantity, a designated space within the building. I didn't ask Derek about it, I didn't ask Yuki. Instead, I began to observe more carefully, trying to determine which aisle the workers moved toward at 1 o'clock a.m., which would give me a clue to where Section C might actually be. What I discovered was that I couldn't quite determine it. The warehouse's blind spots seemed to align perfectly with wherever they were going. Every vantage point I tried to establish was blocked by shelving, or columns, or simply the angle at which workers stood. It was as if the space itself was conspiring to keep me from seeing. On my 4th week, I was stocking inventory in aisle 4 when Patricia approached me with a printout of new assignments. "Derek wants you to help with the 1 o'clock a.m. inventory count tomorrow night," she said, handing me the sheet. "You ready for that?" I took the printout. It simply said, Marcus Chen, 1 o'clock a.m. protocol, section assignment, observation. "Section assignment?" I asked. "What section?" Patricia's expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten. "You'll find out when you need to. And Marcus?" She waited until I met her eyes. "Don't ask questions about it beforehand. It just makes things more complicated." She walked away before I could respond. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the cryptic assignment sheet, at the words observation and section assignment, trying to imagine what I was about to walk into. The handbook's water-stained warning echoed in my mind. Non-compliance results in immediate termination. But termination wasn't the threat. I was beginning to understand. There was something worse implied in the gaps between those words, in the careful silences of Yuki and Derek and Patricia. Something that happened to people who didn't comply, who asked too many questions, who couldn't help but look at things they weren't supposed to see. The next evening, as I drove toward the warehouse, I made a decision. I would show up for the 1 a.m. protocol. I would observe whatever it was they did in that hidden section, and then I would understand exactly what kind of place I'd agreed to work in. I had no idea at that moment that understanding would be far worse than not knowing. I arrived at the warehouse that night with my phone charged and a decision made. I would document everything. It was a stupid decision, the kind that gets made when fear and curiosity reach some critical equilibrium. I'd spent the day obsessing over the assignment sheet, over the word observation, over the certainty that I was about to witness something that would explain why everyone at Sutton Logistics moved through the building like people walking on thin ice. Documentation felt like armor. If I could capture it, catalog it, make it into data, it would be manageable. It would be real in a way that was containable. What I didn't account for was how thoroughly the warehouse resisted observation. My shift started normally. Derek was in the office. Joe and Travis were processing a shipment in the receiving area. Ramon had already descended into the basement section, where he spent most nights in blessed silence. Yuki was doing her pre-shift equipment check on the forklift. Patricia was nowhere to be seen yet, which was unusual. I worked inventory in aisle 2, counting boxes of industrial sealant, photographing serial numbers on my phone under the guise of logging data. At 12:47 a.m., my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Break room, now. I descended the metal staircase that led down from the upper aisles and made my way to the break room. Patricia was waiting, holding a folder. "Marcus," she said, closing the break room door behind me. "Tonight, you're going to observe the 1 a.m. protocol. This is a privilege, and it comes with specific expectations. You will not photograph anything. You will not record audio. You will not interact with the inventory. You will not ask questions during the protocol window. Is that clear?" The way she'd said privilege made my stomach tighten. So did the fact that she knew I'd been planning to photograph things. "Clear," I said. She handed me the folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a map of the warehouse, a map I'd never seen before. Unlike the generic layout I'd been given, this one showed 9 aisles with additional notations. Each aisle had letter designations running along its length. A through I, yes, but also subdivisions. The map showed Section C as a discrete rectangular area that seemed to occupy portions of aisles 6 and 7 simultaneously, which didn't match the spatial reality of the building I'd been walking through for weeks. "You'll enter Section C from the north access point at 0:58 hours, Patricia said, pointing to an unmarked location on the map. "You'll stand in the marked observer position and remain silent and still until 1:15 a.m. Then you'll exit the same way. No deviations." "What exactly will I be?" "No questions," she said. "Not until after the protocol." At 12:55 a.m., I found myself following Patricia through a part of the warehouse I'd never noticed before. We passed through a section behind the administrative office, through a supply room crammed with equipment, and to a door marked only with a faded C, stenciled in black paint. The door was heavier than it should have been, requiring both of us to push it open against some kind of resistance. Air pressure, maybe, or something that felt like it. Beyond the door was a corridor I could not reconcile with the warehouse's exterior dimensions. It was maybe 40 feet long, lined with stark white walls that seemed to emit their own faint light. The fluorescent panels overhead hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. At the far end was another door, identical to the first. The corridor had no other features, no fixtures, no windows, no visible seams or structural elements. It simply existed, a white void suspended in the warehouse's interior. "Stand here," Patricia said, pointing to a spot marked with tape on the floor. "Don't move, don't speak, observe." She departed through the far door, leaving me alone in that white corridor, and I realized with a spike of panic that I'd made a terrible mistake. The minutes between 12:58 and 1 a.m. lasted forever. I stood in that white space, my eyes adjusting to the brightness in a way that made everything seem slightly unreal. The hum of the lights grew louder the longer I listened to it. I became aware of sounds beneath it, a low vibration, rhythmic, almost like breathing. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of that far door. At 1 a.m. exactly, the breathing sound intensified. The far door opened, and workers began filing through. Joe, Travis, Yuki, Ramon, and others I'd never seen before. They wore identical gray coveralls that I'd never noticed in any supply closet, and they moved in absolute silence. They didn't acknowledge my presence. They simply passed through the white corridor in single file, each carrying boxes or sealed containers, moving through a door on the near side of the corridor that I could have sworn hadn't been there moments before. Where were they going? I tried to track the logic of it, but my mind kept slipping. The workers emerged from the far door in a steady stream, maybe 30 people total, and they all moved with that same eerie synchronization. Some carried items, others carried nothing. Some had the glazed expression of people performing a task from deep memory. Others seemed alert, aware, but still silent. And then I saw him. A man in the same gray coveralls, but his face was wrong. Not injured or deformed, but wrong in a way I can only describe as excessive. His features were all present and recognizable. Eyes, nose, mouth. But they seemed to occupy too much space, as if the face had been stretched or expanded slightly beyond its normal proportions. His skin had a translucent quality that reminded me of something preserved in formaldehyde. He stopped in front of me. "You're new," he said, his voice exactly like I'd expect his voice to sound. Normal, cordial, carrying no inflection. "Welcome to Section C." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My mouth had gone completely dry. "It's all right," he continued. "You're only observing. You won't understand what you're seeing yet, but you will. Everyone does eventually." He smiled. His teeth were too white. "Derek said you were curious. That's good. Curious people work harder once they understand the structure. Curious people realize they don't have a choice, but they choose to participate anyway. That's the best kind of worker." He resumed moving, passing through the near side door that led back into the main warehouse, and the other workers continued their procession behind him. I remained frozen, my hands shaking, my vision starting to tunnel. I counted 6 more workers passing through, and then the stream stopped. The far door closed. The white corridor hummed its lonely hum, and I stood there, alone, until Patricia emerged from the near side door at 1:15 a.m. "Come on," she said, not looking at me. "Protocol's over." We walked back through the warehouse in silence. I tried to process what I'd seen, tried to reconstruct it into something that made logical sense, and found I couldn't. The image of that man's face kept surfacing, the stretched features, the translucent skin, the certainty with which he'd spoken about my inevitable understanding. "Who was that man?" I asked as we reached the main warehouse floor. Patricia stopped walking. "You were instructed not to ask questions during the protocol. That was after, don't ask questions about what you saw," she corrected. "Ever. Not to me, not to Derek, not to anyone except the others in Section C. And even then, only if you want to start the process of becoming management level." "What process?" What happens to people who stop, she said, and there was genuine fear in her voice. Marcus, I'm warning you. There are things you can unsee if you don't dwell on them. But if you keep asking, keep pushing, you'll cross a line, and then there's no going back. She returned to the office, and I was left standing in the middle of aisle 3 at 1:16 a.m. holding an unasked question that felt like it was burning a hole in my chest. I tried to work the rest of my shift. I counted boxes, I scanned inventory, I moved through the warehouse in a daze, but my mind kept returning to the white corridor, to the man with the wrong face, to Patricia's warning about lines and processes. On my drive home that morning, I made a decision. I would find the security footage. There had to be cameras in the warehouse. Industrial facilities like Sutton Logistics didn't operate without video surveillance. If I could access those feeds, I could verify what I'd seen. I could confirm that the white corridor existed, that the man with the excessive face was real, that I hadn't experienced some kind of shared hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. Finding the access code took 3 nights. I discovered it written inside a bathroom stall in faded ballpoint pen, barely legible. Alpha 7734. The code worked on the security room door in the administrative office, the one marked authorized personnel only that I'd always assumed was locked. It wasn't. It opened easily, as if someone had wanted me to find it. The security room was small, lined with monitors showing feeds from various sections of the warehouse. Most were standard: loading docks, aisles, the administrative office. But one monitor showed the white corridor, and as I watched, I realized that the feed was displaying something that couldn't possibly exist. The white corridor extended at least 200 feet on this camera view, but the warehouse's total interior depth was maybe 150 feet. The corridor was longer than the building itself, and then I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around to find Travis standing in the doorway, and his expression wasn't angry. It was sad, genuinely sad, the way you'd look at someone who'd just stepped into traffic without noticing. "Marcus," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be in here." "What is this place?" I demanded. "What's happening in that corridor? What was that man?" Travis stepped inside and closed the door. He seemed to be choosing his words with enormous care. "That man isn't a man anymore," Travis said. "That's what management level looks like after a few years. After you've handled enough of the inventory. After you've participated in enough protocols." "What do you mean, participated? What's the inventory?" Travis looked at the monitors, then back at me. "The things in Section C aren't boxes, Marcus. They're placeholders. The real inventory moves through the protocol. We process it, we handle it, and it changes us. Slowly. Derek's been here for 17 years. That man you saw, he's been management for 14. By the time you reach that stage, you're not really human anymore, but you're also not really not human. You exist in the protocol. You exist between moments." "That's insane," I whispered. "Yes," Travis agreed, "but it's also true. And now that you've seen the footage, now that you've started really looking, you're going to be noticed. The structure is aware of people like you, people who question, people who observe too closely." "I can quit." "No," Travis said. "You can't. Not anymore." Behind him, on the monitors, I watched the white corridor begin to glow brighter, as if something deep within it was beginning to wake up and pay attention. I didn't go back to the warehouse for 2 days. I called in sick, which was technically true. I felt sick, a deep, nauseous ache that lived in my chest and wouldn't dissolve no matter how much water I drank or how long I slept. I spent those days in my apartment with the lights on, trying to convince myself that Travis had been lying, that the corridor footage was somehow doctored, that people don't transform into something other through participation in a workplace protocol. The rationalization didn't work. By the third day, I received a text from Derek. "You're scheduled for tonight. See you at 11 p.m. I didn't respond. I sat with my phone in my hand for 3 hours, waiting for another message, a threat, something that would clarify whether I actually had the option of refusing. Nothing came. Just the single directive, delivered with the certainty of someone who already knew I'd show up. I showed up. The warehouse felt different that night. Or maybe I was different, and the warehouse felt the same way it always had. But I was now aware of the wrongness in a way that couldn't be unlearned. I clocked in, put on my vest, and tried to blend into the routine. Joe was there, Ramon was there, but I noticed immediately that Shelby wasn't. Shelby was a new hire, started maybe a week before the 1 a.m. protocol I'd witnessed. She was sharp, ambitious, always asking questions about advancement and overtime opportunities. She'd made the mistake of being exactly the kind of person who believed hard work and initiative would get you ahead. I'd overheard her tell Derek she wanted to work late shifts to get extra hours and prove herself. I'd warned her, obliquely, about staying late. She'd smiled and said she didn't believe in arbitrary rules. "Where's Shelby?" I asked Derek, keeping my voice casual as he handed me my assignment sheet. "Transfer," he said immediately, not looking up from his tablet. "Day shift." She expressed interest in a different schedule. "I didn't see a transfer notice." "It happened yesterday," Derek said. "Quick placement, she's happier there." But when I checked the roster board during my break, Shelby's name wasn't listed anywhere. Not on day shift, not on swing shift, not in any capacity. She'd been removed from the system as cleanly as if she'd never existed. I found Joe in the receiving area, unloading a shipment of industrial pumps. "Shelby," I said quietly, "did you know she was transferring?" Joe's hands stilled for a moment. He didn't look at me. "Yeah, yesterday. Derek announced it." "To who?" "Everyone." Joe resumed unloading, his movements careful, deliberate. "During the protocol window." "I wasn't part of the protocol window yet." "Exactly," Joe said, finally glancing at me. "Look, Marcus, some things you don't need to be part of. Shelby made her choice. She worked aisle 7 after midnight. You know the rules about that, even if nobody's written them down. What happens if you work aisle 7 after midnight?" Joe turned away from me completely. "Nothing. She transferred. Stop asking about it." But that night, around 11:30 p.m., I did something that Travis had implicitly warned me against. I went looking. Aisle 7 sat in the warehouse's layout exactly where I remembered it, but I'd never actually walked its length. Workers avoided it, and I'd unconsciously absorbed that avoidance without examining it. Now I moved toward it deliberately, my heart rate climbing with each step. The aisle looked like any other. Gray metal shelving, rows of boxes organized by size and weight, inventory stickers and barcode labels. Nothing obviously wrong, nothing that suggested why everyone treated it like a void that required circumnavigation. I was halfway through the aisle when I heard the sound. It was rhythmic, wet, like something being pulled through water. It came from the upper shelving, maybe 12 feet up. I grabbed one of the step ladders from the aisle's end and climbed up, my mouth dry, every instinct screaming at me to leave. On the upper shelf, partially hidden behind a stack of sealed boxes, was a wet spot on the metal surface. Not water, something with a faint luminescence, like the trailing residue of something that had passed through and left itself behind. The rhythmic sound continued, coming from deeper in the aisle, from the darkness behind the upper shelving. I climbed down immediately and moved deeper into the aisle, following the sound. It grew louder, more pronounced, and I became aware of a smell beneath it. Not rotting, not exactly, but organic in a way that didn't belong in a climate-controlled warehouse. The smell of something alive in a place where nothing should be alive. At the far end of the aisle, I found a section of shelving that looked subtly different from the rest. The boxes stored there were unmarked, which violated every inventory protocol I'd been taught. They were also heavier than they should be, sagging slightly under the weight of whatever was inside. I reached out to open one. "Don't," a voice said behind me. I spun to find Yuki standing at the entrance to the aisle, her expression caught between anger and pity. "The sound," I said. "What is it?" "Something that shouldn't be your concern." She stepped forward, positioning herself between me and the boxes. "And something that's definitely paying attention to you now. Shelby came back here, didn't she?" "Yes." "What happened to her?" Yuki's jaw clenched. For a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, she asked questions. She didn't follow protocols. She wanted to understand how the warehouse worked. Yuki paused. The warehouse answered her. "That doesn't tell me..." "Marcus, some ignorance is protective," Yuki said. "I'm going to walk away now. I'm going to pretend this conversation didn't happen, and you're going to come with me, leave this aisle, and go back to your assignment. Can you do that?" I could, but I didn't. Instead, I waited until she'd returned to the main warehouse floor, and then I opened the nearest unmarked box. Inside was something that I would spend years trying to unsee. It wasn't Shelby. It was, at some fundamental level, the concept of Shelby. Her mannerisms, her vocal patterns, her memories perhaps, but housed in a form that resembled her the way a mannequin in a shop window resembles a human being. She was folded, compacted, as if her three-dimensional body had been photographed, and then the photograph had been treated as a blueprint for something that only approximated her original shape. Her eyes were still there, and they tracked my movement with terrible clarity. She made a sound, a wet, aspirated thing that might have been my name. I closed the box and ran. I made it to the bathroom before I vomited, my entire body seized with the need to purge the reality of what I'd just witnessed. When I emerged, Patricia was waiting outside the bathroom door. "You opened a box in aisle 7, she said. It wasn't a question. "That wasn't Shelby," I gasped. That wasn't storage," Patricia said. "For items that have completed their processing but haven't yet been shipped to permanent inventory." "Shipped? You mean..." "The warehouse receives shipments," Patricia said calmly, "and the warehouse sends them out. That's the entire purpose of this facility. Sutton Logistics isn't a shipping warehouse, Marcus. We're a processing center. We receive items that are outside normal dimensions, outside normal time, outside the normal rules of existence. We handle them, we store them, we prepare them for distribution. And people? Shelby was a person. Shelby was an item," Patricia corrected. "She became an item the moment she violated protocol. She opened herself to processing, and now she's stable, stored, ready for wherever she needs to go." Patricia stepped closer. "You've now been exposed to multiple protocol violations. You've seen footage you shouldn't have seen. You've opened storage containers. You've interacted with processed items. Do you understand what this means?" I did, with terrible clarity. "I'm going to be processed," I said. "Unless," Patricia said, "you agree to management-level training." "No, you haven't heard what that entails." "I don't care." "The answer is no." Patricia nodded, as if I'd confirmed something she already knew. "Then I need to give you a choice, Marcus. You can continue working here, knowing what you know, playing by the rules, until you eventually slip up and become part of the inventory. Or you can leave. Tonight. Walk out, never return, and spend the rest of your life knowing that something here was aware you were aware, and it will always be waiting for you to slip up." "That's not a choice," I whispered. "No," Patricia agreed, "but it's all you have." She walked away, leaving me alone in the hallway, and I understood with finality that I was trapped. The warehouse had opened its geometry to me, shown me the shape of what it was, and now separation from it was impossible. Leaving wouldn't sever the connection. Staying wouldn't save me. There was no third option, no escape route, no narrative where I came out clean. I could only choose how I would fall. I returned to the main warehouse floor and found that the clock on the wall read 1 a.m. Around me, workers moved with their familiar synchronization, heading toward the protocol. But this time, no one was preventing me from following. Yuki passed by and placed a gray coverall on a nearby shelf, the universal warehouse signal for participation. Derek approached me from the office. "You're ready," he said. It wasn't a question. Ready for what? To stop observing, Derek said. To start participating. I put on the coverall, and the warehouse accepted me into itself like a mouth swallowing. I don't have a clear memory of what happened during that first protocol participation. This isn't amnesia, exactly. It's more like the experience exists in my mind as a series of isolated moments with no connective tissue between them. I remember putting on the gray coverall and feeling it conform to my body as if it had been fitted specifically for me, which was impossible. I remember moving toward the white corridor with the other workers. I remember Derek standing at a threshold and nodding, as if approving my passage. And then everything fractures into fragments, the sensation of lifting something that felt weightier than its dimensions suggested. The sound of Yuki's voice speaking words I couldn't quite parse, a smell like copper mixed with something floral and wrong. When I emerged from the protocol window, it was 1:15 a.m., and I was changed in a way I couldn't articulate, but could absolutely feel. My hands didn't hurt. They should have hurt, but they felt different. Not numb, but sensitive in a new way, aware of textures and temperatures with an intensity that felt almost painful. When I looked at them in the bathroom mirror during my break, they appeared normal, but I could see something beneath the skin, something moving in branching patterns, like veins that shouldn't exist. Derek found me staring at my hands. "That'll fade in a few hours," he said. "Mostly. The changes are subtle at first. Over time, you'll adapt. Your nervous system is just recalibrating." "What did we do in there?" I asked. "In the protocol, I can't remember." "You participated," Derek said. "You handled items. You assisted in their processing and stabilization. What specifically happened isn't important. Your conscious mind isn't equipped to process it cleanly, so your brain created gaps. That's protective. That's the structure working in your favor." "The structure," I repeated. "You keep talking about it like it's a person, like it's aware." Derek looked at me with something approaching sympathy. "It is aware, Marcus. Not like you're aware. Not with thoughts and feelings and intentions, but aware like a biological system is aware of infection. The warehouse is an organism. We're not workers here. We're white blood cells. We process threats to its equilibrium. We handle things that don't belong in normal space, and in exchange, we're permitted to exist within its perimeter." I wanted to argue that this was insane, that there was no such thing as a sentient warehouse, that I'd descended into some kind of shared psychosis with my coworkers, but my hands were still showing those branching patterns beneath the skin, and I couldn't quite remember where aisle 5 was, or if I'd ever actually known, or if the warehouse had simply absorbed that knowledge from me. "How long until I'm like them?" I asked. "Until I'm like the man in the protocol. Until I'm not. Management level takes years," Derek said. 14, 17, 20. It depends on how many protocols you participate in, how much inventory you handle directly, how much your consciousness integrates with the warehouse's structure. You've got time, and you can make peace with it, Marcus. That's what I did. That's what everyone does eventually." He left me alone in the break room, and I sat there in the gray coverall, which I suddenly realized I was still wearing, and felt something like drowning, except the ocean was inside me, and I was completely submerged. Over the following weeks, I attempted to leave multiple times. The first attempt was simple. I called Derek 2 hours before my shift and said I quit. He listened without interrupting, said, "I understand," and hung up. When I didn't show up that night, he didn't call me back. But the next evening, I found myself driving toward the warehouse without conscious intention. My hands moved the steering wheel, my foot pressed the accelerator, and when I parked in the lot, I couldn't remember making the decision to come. The second attempt was more deliberate. I packed a bag, called in a favor with an old college friend who lived in Portland, and drove for 6 hours before the panic attack started. It wasn't a normal panic attack. It was the physical sensation of something reaching for me from a great distance, a pressure in my chest that felt like a hand closing around my heart. I had to pull over. I couldn't breathe. And the only thing that made it stop was when I turned the car around and started driving back towards Sutton Logistics. By the time I'd driven halfway back, the pressure had eased. By the time I reached the warehouse, it was gone completely, replaced by a sense of rightness, of coming home. Yuki found me in the warehouse that night, looking disheveled and wild-eyed. "You tried to leave," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Because I can feel it," Yuki said. "Everyone here can feel everyone else trying to leave. It's like a vibration through the warehouse, and the warehouse doesn't like it. It holds on, so I'm trapped." "We're all trapped," Yuki said. Her expression was calm, accepting. "But I'm used to it now. I think about leaving less than I did 6 months ago, less than I did a year ago. Eventually, you stop thinking about leaving at all. You understand that this is the only structure in your life that makes sense anymore. Outside is chaos. Here is order. Terrible, impossible order, but order nonetheless." "How many protocols have you participated in?" I stopped counting at 100, Yuki said. "I've been here 3 years. That's roughly 1 protocol per week, sometimes more. Derek's been here 17 years. Travis has been here 11. And the man you saw, the one with the face, he's been participating for 37 years. That's not possible. He'd be old." Yuki smiled sadly. "Time works differently in the protocols. He's probably in his 70s if you calculated normal aging, but he looks exactly the same as he did when he started management level. The warehouse preserves those who've integrated deeply enough." I wanted to ask her if this was a comfort or a curse. I wanted to ask if there was any point at which she'd stopped being Yuki and started being something else wearing her name. But I already knew the answers, could feel them in the warehouse's geometry, in the way my hands no longer felt like they belonged entirely to me. A week later, Derek called me into the office. "You're ready for advancement," he said. "Management level training begins next week. You'll start learning about what's on the other side of the white corridor. You'll understand the structure better, and you'll begin the process of becoming something that can interface with the items directly." "I don't want this," I said. "I know." Derek pulled a photograph from his desk drawer and slid it toward me. It showed the warehouse from the outside, but not as it was now. The building was much smaller, maybe half its current size, and standing in front of it was Derek, looking exactly as he looked today, with a date stamped on the bottom, 1987. "I made a choice once," Derek said, "to participate, to stop fighting, and in exchange, I got stability. I got meaning. I got to be part of something larger than myself. Yes, it changed me. Yes, I'll eventually look like the man you saw. But until then, I exist in a state that most people never achieve. I'm part of a system that works. I'm useful. I matter." He put the photo away. "You'll understand, Marcus. After the next protocol, after you handle more of the deep inventory, you'll understand that this is the only thing worth doing, that your old life was empty, that this," he gestured vaguely at the warehouse around us, "this is the only truth that exists." That night, I sat at home and searched for information about Sutton Logistics. The company had been founded in 1987. It had never made the news. There were no articles about it, no reviews, no lawsuits. The official website was minimal, just the company name and a phone number. I called the number. It rang once, twice, and then I heard Derek's voice, even though I knew he was in the warehouse. "Sutton Logistics," the voice said. "How may we direct your inquiry?" I hung up. The next morning, I found an old photograph of the warehouse in the city records office, a newspaper clipping from 1987 showing the grand opening. The building in the photo was smaller, yes, but the workers in the photo included faces I recognized. Derek was there. Yuki was there. The man with the wrong face was there. They were all exactly as they looked today, unchanged by 37 years, except for one detail I hadn't noticed until I looked closely: their hands. In the 1987 photo, their hands showed those same branching patterns beneath the skin that now marked my own hands. They were already part of the structure. They had always been part of the structure, which meant that time didn't just work differently in the protocols. It meant that some of us had never left at all. When I returned to the warehouse that night, I didn't bother pretending I was going to fight anymore. I put on the gray coverall without resistance. I walked toward the protocol, and in the white corridor, as I waited for the door to the deep storage section to open, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, exactly, but the cessation of struggle. Derek was waiting at the threshold. "Welcome to management level," he said. "There's so much more structure to show you." The door opened, and I stepped through into spaces that shouldn't exist, toward understanding that I was no longer sure I wanted to avoid. Management level training didn't involve classrooms or documentation. It involved descending. The white corridor I'd observed as an outsider was only the threshold. Beyond it lay a structure of passages that seemed to reorient themselves based on direction of travel. Derek guided me through them with the casual familiarity of someone walking a well-known path, but I noticed he never consulted any map or signage. He simply knew, the way a person knows the layout of their childhood home. "The warehouse has 7 operational levels," Derek explained as we walked. "You've only ever been to levels 1 and 2, the main floor and the observation corridor. Levels 3 through 5 contain deep storage. Level 6 is processing. And level 7," he paused. "Level 7 is what the warehouse is actually for." "What do you mean, what it's actually for?" I asked. "Processing items, moving inventory. That's what we do," Derek said. "But that's not why the warehouse exists. There's a difference." The passage opened into a vast chamber that made the main warehouse floor seem cramped by comparison. The ceiling was lost in shadow far above, and the walls extended so far that I couldn't see where they met the edges. The chamber was filled with rows of containers, some metal, some glass, some made of material I couldn't identify. Each container had something inside it, but the contents were obscured by distance, by the light, by something that resisted clear observation. "This is level 3, Derek said. "Deep storage, items in transition. Some of them are arriving. Some are in the process of being prepared for distribution. Some are simply waiting until the structure determines they're ready to move forward." "Ready for what?" Derek didn't answer immediately. Instead, he led me to one of the glass containers, and I forced myself to look inside. The item within was difficult to comprehend. It had the general architecture of a human body, but the proportions were subtly wrong. Limbs that bent at angles that shouldn't exist. A head that seemed to contain more internal volume than the skull could hold. But what struck me most was that it was moving, slowly, deliberately, as if it were breathing, or thinking, or both simultaneously. "What is that?" I whispered. "An arrival," Derek said. "It came through the receiving dock 3 weeks ago. It's still acclimating to three-dimensional space. Most arrivals take a few weeks to stabilize before they can be fully processed. From where? Where do these things come from? From spaces that exist adjacent to ours, Derek said. He sounded tired, as if he'd answered this question too many times. Not other dimensions, exactly. The warehouse doesn't deal with dimensions. It deals with what you might call structural weaknesses, places where the normal rules of space and time and matter aren't enforced as strictly. Things live in those places, things that are impossible by our standards, but perfectly normal by theirs. And sometimes those things slip through, or sometimes the warehouse brings them through intentionally. Why would the warehouse intentionally bring them through? Derek continued walking and I followed. Because that's the exchange. We process them. We help them acclimate, or we prepare them for distribution, or we store them for later use. And in exchange, the warehouse maintains its structure. It keeps existing. It keeps being a place where things that shouldn't exist can exist. We descended further. Level 4 was smaller than Level 3, a kind of processing chamber where I saw workers in gray coveralls attending to containers with instruments I didn't recognize. The instruments weren't being used to harm the items inside. They were being used to measure them, calibrate them, adjust something about their fundamental nature. When one of the workers noticed Derek, they nodded but didn't stop their work. There was no greeting, no acknowledgement beyond that small gesture. How long have those workers been here? I asked. Long enough, Derek said. I don't know their names anymore. They started around the same time I did, 17 years ago. After a certain amount of time in the warehouse, names become less important than function. Level 5 was archives, endless shelving holding items in stasis, thousands of them, millions perhaps. Each shelf was labeled with notations I couldn't read, marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. I could feel the presence of all these things, a pressure against my awareness, like water pressing against a dam. They weren't dead. They weren't conscious in any way I could understand. They were simply stored, held in a state of suspension that transcended normal preservation. Some of these have been here for decades, Derek said, some for centuries. The warehouse exists outside normal time on this level. A year passes in the main warehouse, but only a day passes here, or vice versa. It depends on which direction you're moving. Why? I asked. Why keep them for so long? Because distribution requires specific conditions, Derek said. A place on the other side that's ready to receive them. A moment in time where the alignment is correct. Sometimes that takes years to arrange. Sometimes it takes longer than that. We reached the stairs to level 6, and Derek paused before descending. Level 6 is where we interface with the items directly, he said, where we actually conduct the processing. It's more intense than anything you've experienced. If you're not ready, you can stop here. Yuki stopped here. Travis stopped here. Most workers do. They participate in the upper-level protocols, help with receiving and stabilization, but they never go deeper. I could feel the pull from below, that same pressure I'd felt when trying to leave the warehouse. But this time, it was drawing me downward instead of holding me in place. What happens if I go down? I asked. You start becoming what you're meant to become, Derek said. You begin to truly integrate with the warehouse's structure. Your consciousness starts to exist in the spaces between moments. Your body becomes secondary to your function. You become management level in a way that goes beyond just having the title. You become part of the warehouse. I thought about the man with the wrong face. I thought about Derek's unchanging face in the 1987 photograph. I thought about Yuki's resigned acceptance of her 3-year captivity. What's on level 7? I asked instead. Derek smiled. That's what I'm wondering too. I've been here 17 years, and I've never gone to level 7. Nobody goes to level 7. Not even the management level staff. Level 7 is what the warehouse guards. It's the thing that requires all the processing, all the storage, all the structure above it. The heart of it, I said. Or the thing the warehouse is trying to prevent from escaping, Derek replied. Or both, or neither. After a while, you stop thinking in terms of or and start thinking in terms of and, because the warehouse teaches you that contradiction isn't something that needs resolving. It's just another structural component. I descended. Level 6 was nothing like what I expected. It wasn't a chamber or a corridor. It was a space that seemed to exist in all directions simultaneously. I could walk and somehow also be standing still, could see something happening in the distance, and also have it occurring directly in front of me. The items being processed here were more unstable than those in storage, transitioning between states, their forms flickering between solidity and something that resembled mist or thought. And I understood in that moment what I was actually doing at the warehouse. We weren't handling items. We were negotiating with them. Every protocol was a conversation between our structural reality and theirs. A compromise where both sides agreed to temporarily coexist in a space that shouldn't allow either of them. The workers here, actual management level personnel, I realized, moved through the processing like dancers executing a precisely choreographed performance. They weren't using instruments. They were using gestures, resonances, something that seemed to exist in the space between intention and action. One of them turned to me. It took me a moment to recognize the face beneath the excessive features, the translucence of the skin. "Welcome," the thing that had once been a person said. Its voice was exactly as it had been before. Human, cordial, certain. "You're ready to understand now. The warehouse has been waiting for you to reach this point. It knew you would from the moment you applied for the job. Everything since then has been the structure revealing itself to you gradually. Now you can see the whole picture." "What picture?" I asked. "That you never had a choice," the being said. "That nobody here has ever had a choice. That the warehouse chose us before we chose it. That our entire lives outside this place were preparation for the moment we would walk through that door and become what we were always meant to become. That even now, when you know the truth, you'll stay. Because the truth is that you were never anything but this. Everything else was just the illusion the warehouse was kind enough to let you maintain until you were ready for the reality underneath." And I felt it then. The warehouse's awareness, vast and patient and ancient, settling its attention on me completely. I felt it looking at me from within my own bones, from the spaces between my thoughts, from the places in the world where the normal rules didn't apply. I felt it recognizing me as something it had always known. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," the being said, "you descend to level 7, and the floor opened beneath me, not violently, but gently, like the mouth of something welcoming me home. Falling through level 6 took an indeterminate amount of time. I was aware of movement, a sensation of descending through space that was simultaneously infinite and impossibly compressed. I passed through layers of reality that felt like different densities of air, each one thicker with presence than the last. And then, without any sense of impact, I was standing on a floor. Level 7 was vast in a way that made the word inadequate. It extended in all directions, but not as directions existed elsewhere in the warehouse. Up, down, forward, backward. These concepts didn't quite apply here. The space was organized around something at its center, though I couldn't determine whether the center was close or infinitely distant. That something was waiting. It wasn't the item, not in the way I'd been thinking about items. It was the thing the warehouse had been built around. The thing the processing levels existed to contain and manage and negotiate with. The thing that required a 7-story structure of carefully orchestrated protocols just to maintain a stable coexistence. I couldn't describe it. Not because it was too alien or too terrible, though it was both of those things. I couldn't describe it because my mind kept sliding off it, like water off polished metal. I could hold a single aspect of it for a moment, a sense of immensity, a feeling of ancient hunger, a presence so vast that the entire warehouse was barely a membrane between it and the world outside, and then I'd lose it and have to start again. Derek was there, or something wearing Derek's shape was there. Management level Derek, I understood now, wasn't Derek anymore. It was the warehouse wearing Derek like a suit, using his form as an interface. You can see it now, Derek not Derek said. The thing we're managing, the reason for everything. What is it? My voice sounded strange in this space, like it was being translated through layers before reaching my own ears. We don't have a name for it, Derek said. Not a human name. It communicates in ways that don't translate to language. But if you need context, it's been here longer than the warehouse has existed, longer than humans have existed. It's from a time when the rules that govern reality were still being written, and something changed. Something shifted in the space adjacent to ours, and it started pressing against our world. The warehouse was built to contain that pressure, to maintain a boundary where there shouldn't be one. Why? I asked. Why not just let it through? Why not just accept it? Because, a voice said, and it took me a moment to realize it was coming from the center, from the thing itself. Acceptance would be the end of your reality, not destruction, not obliteration, just cessation of distinction. Your world and mine would merge, and there would be no more separation between them, no more you and not you. Just existence without structure. The voice wasn't using sound. It was being directly inserted into my understanding, bypassing ears and language entirely. So the warehouse keeps it out, I said. The warehouse keeps us in, Derek corrected. The containment goes both directions. We're not protecting ourselves from it. We're protecting it from us. We're preventing it from overwhelming this reality and preventing this reality from overwhelming it. The warehouse is a negotiation space, a compromise, a place where two incompatible realities can coexist by accepting carefully controlled protocols. I tried to process this. And you're volunteers for this? You chose to be part of this? No one chooses, Derek said. But everyone participates, and over time, participation becomes acceptance. That's how the structure works. It identifies people who could survive the integration, people whose consciousness is flexible enough to exist in the spaces between moments. It draws them in, shows them, just enough to trigger curiosity, enough to make them ask questions that can't be ignored, and then it shows them the truth, and they realize they were always meant to be here. Like you, I said. Like Yuki, like the man with the wrong face. Like you, Derek said. The warehouse knew when you were born, Marcus. It knew the day you applied for this job. It's been orchestrating your arrival since before you existed as a conscious entity. You're not a random hire. You're part of the structure's maintenance cycle. The thing at the center of level 7 moved, not physically, but conceptually. I felt its attention shift, and it was looking at me the way Derek was looking at me, recognizing me, seeing something in me that had been there from the beginning. I could leave, I said. The words sounded hollow even as I spoke them. You could try, Derek said, and the warehouse would let you, because the warehouse follows the protocols. It would release you to the surface, and you'd walk out into the world. But you'd carry something with you, the awareness, the knowledge that this exists, and that knowledge would poison everything else. You'd spend your remaining years knowing that there was something beneath the surface of reality, something vast and patient and waiting. You'd never have a moment of peace, never forget, never escape. So my choice is stay here and integrate, or leave and go insane. Your choice, Derek said, is to accept that you're already integrated, The choice happened before you were aware of it. Right now, you're just deciding whether to acknowledge what's already true. And then I understood something that made everything else fall into place. The woman at the hiring interview, who'd smiled and handed me the application. The efficiency with which I'd been hired. Derek's knowledge of everything I was going to do before I did it. Yuki's warnings that felt like they were following a script. The handbook with its redacted sections that I was always meant to find. The water-damaged version with the exact information I needed. The security code written in the bathroom stall. Every single thing had been arranged, orchestrated, choreographed by something that existed outside time and causality. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked the thing at the center. "Since before your species developed language," it said, "but also only this moment. Causality is complicated from where I exist. I am always selecting people for the warehouse, and I have always selected you, and I will always select the next person who is right. Past, present, future. These aren't sequential for me. They're all the same moment experienced from different angles." I felt something breaking inside me. Not damage, but a kind of shattering of the boundaries I'd always assumed were solid. The edges of myself were becoming softer, less defined. I was starting to feel what it would be like to exist in the spaces between moments, to be integrated with something vast and patient, and unconcerned with my individual comfort. "If I stay," I said, "if I accept this, what happens to Marcus Chen? Does he continue to exist?" "Marcus Chen continues to exist in the way all of us do," Derek said. "Distributed across multiple states, aware and unaware simultaneously, functioning in the warehouse and existing outside of it, having agency and having none. It's not the existence you experienced before, but it's not non-existence either. It's something between." Behind Derek, I could see other figures approaching. Workers in gray coveralls. Some of them I recognized. Yuki, Travis, Joe, Ramon. Others I didn't recognize. And I realized they might be arrivals from other times, other instances of the warehouse that existed in the spaces adjacent to this one. They were all waiting to see what I would choose. "There's someone else," I said. "Someone I need to see before I decide." Derek tilted his head. The gesture was so Derek-like, so perfectly his mannerism, that I realized the warehouse wasn't completely erasing him. It was layering itself over him, becoming him, wearing him the way I might wear clothes. But the original fabric was still there, just underneath. "Yuki," I said. "I need to talk to Yuki." She stepped forward from the group. She still looked like Yuki, but her eyes held that same indefinable quality that Derek's held. The sense of something vast looking out through human eyes. "I'm here," she said. "If I accept this," I asked, "is there any part of me that remains, that stays separate from the warehouse?" Yuki was silent for a long moment. Then, "I think about leaving less and less," she said. "And I'm not sure if that's because the warehouse is taking that desire from me, or because I'm genuinely understanding that leaving would be worse. I can't tell the difference between accepting the warehouse and having my acceptance extracted from me. But I also know that the original me, the girl from 3 years ago, she's still in here somewhere. She exists in memory, in the way I move, in the jokes I make that nobody finds funny except the ones who remember making those jokes too. The warehouse doesn't erase, it incorporates." "That's not reassuring," I said. "No," Yuki agreed, "but it's true." I looked at the thing at the center of level 7. I looked at Derek, at Yuki, at the other workers waiting in the spaces between moments. I thought about the world above, about my apartment, about the life I'd been living that now felt like a dream I was waking from. "I need time," I said, "before I decide." "Time is the one thing we have in abundance," Derek said. "We can give you that. You can go back up, go to the break room, sit for a while, think about it. How long? As long as you need." Derek said. "The warehouse is patient. It's already waited for you forever. It can wait a little longer." I climbed the stairs back to level 6, then level 5, then through the processing areas, past the deep storage, back through the white corridor. When I reached the main warehouse floor, it was somehow still the same time, 4:37 a.m., according to the clock on the wall. Derek and the thing beneath level 7 had given me the gift of time that didn't advance the world. I had as long as I needed to make a decision that was never really a choice. I walked to the break room, poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like copper and regret, and waited for the shift to end. Around me, the warehouse hummed its endless hum, and somewhere in the depths below, something vast and patient continued to press against the membrane of reality, held back only by the careful choreography of people like me, making the choice I was about to make. I didn't actually decide. I sat in the break room for 6 hours, drinking coffee that cycled through temperatures it shouldn't have been able to cycle through, and I waited for some moment of clarity that never came. At some point, I realized that clarity wasn't going to arrive because the decision had already been made, not by me, but through me. The warehouse had woven itself into my consciousness so thoroughly that Marcus Chen's intentions had become indistinguishable from the warehouse's intentions. This wasn't frightening anymore. It was restful. At 10:47 p.m., exactly 24 hours after Derek had given me my management level assignment, I clocked back in for my shift. Derek was waiting near the administrative office, and he smiled when he saw me. It was Derek's smile, the one I remembered from my first night. But now I could perceive the layers beneath it. The thing wearing Derek's body was radiating something like approval. "You've decided," Derek said. "Yes," I heard myself say. "Where do I need to be?" "Training room," Derek said. "Patricia will orient you." But when I found Patricia in the training room, she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a new hire, a woman with dark hair and that particular blend of nervousness and hope that I recognized from looking at my own reflection weeks ago. She was holding a laminated employee handbook, looking at the redacted sections with a kind of desperate curiosity. "This is Shelby," Patricia said. "New hire. She'll be shadowing you tonight." I froze. "Shelby?" "Different Shelby," Patricia said without irony. "We recycle names sometimes. It's more efficient. Keeps workers from asking questions about personnel changes." The new Shelby looked at me with uncertainty. "You're going to be training me?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it without resentment or irony. "Welcome to Sutton Logistics." That night, I showed Shelby the layout of the main warehouse floor. I showed her how to read inventory codes. I taught her the routes that workers avoided without explanation. I watched her begin the same journey of subtle discovery that had consumed me for months. The oddness of the floor markings, the synchronized behavior at specific times, the way certain aisles seem to exist in slightly different spatial configurations than they should. When she asked about aisle 7, I gave her the same deflection Derek had given me. "It's stocked like any other," I said. "You'll get familiar with the layout." And I felt the warehouse smile through me. At 12:54 a.m., I guided her toward a specific position on the main floor. Not for the 1 o'clock a.m. protocol, she wasn't ready for that yet, but for something else. Derek had explained my new role during the training period I wasn't consciously aware was happening. I was a shepherd now, a guide. My job was to move people toward the protocols gradually, to answer their questions in ways that created more questions, to walk alongside them as they descended into the warehouse's structure. Shelby noticed the synchronized movement of the workers around 1 o'clock a.m. She pointed it out to me with an expression of dawning realization. "That happens every night," I said. "At the same time, exactly the same." "Why?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said. And this was true, or true enough. The original Marcus Chen didn't fully understand. The part of me that was increasingly the warehouse's instrument understood perfectly, but that knowledge existed in compartments that the human part couldn't access. But I'm trying to find out. There are patterns if you know how to look for them. I could feel her fear shifting into curiosity. I could feel the warehouse sensing that shift, appreciating it, marking her as someone worth incorporating. Over the following weeks, I trained other new hires. Some of them lasted longer than others. A man named David quit after his first week, and I watched Derek explain to the next batch of trainees that David had found work elsewhere. I didn't check the roster. I didn't need to. I knew where David had gone, to the same place Shelby had gone, to that floating space between the warehouse's upper levels and the deep storage, to the comfortable numbness of processing. My body was changing. The branching patterns in my hands had spread to my forearms, my shoulders, even down my spine. When I looked in the mirror, my face seemed slightly too large for my skull, my eyes holding a depth that went further back than eyes should. I was becoming management level, but not in the dramatic way the original man had become it. I was changing gradually, smoothly, becoming something that could exist in multiple states without obvious deformation. One night, Yuki approached me in the loading area. "You're different," she said. "I'm integrating," I replied. "No," Yuki said. "You're different from Derek, from the man, from the rest of us. You're becoming something new, something the warehouse hasn't created before." I turned to look at her, and in her expression, I saw something I hadn't noticed in anyone else. Curiosity. Not about the warehouse, about me. "What do you think I'm becoming?" I asked. "Something between the warehouse and us," Yuki said. "Something that remembers being fully human, but is willing to let that go. That's dangerous, Marcus. The warehouse doesn't like things it can't predict. The warehouse likes everything," I said. "Or it tolerates everything. I'm not sure there's a difference." Yuki didn't respond, but I felt the warehouse's attention shift toward her. She'd spoken something true, and the structure was noting it, filing it away, deciding whether she needed to be handled differently or encouraged further. 2 months into my management training, Derek took me to level 6 for what I understood would be my final protocol before I was promoted to something higher. We entered the processing chamber, and the items in transition seemed to recognize me this time, their form stabilizing slightly in response to my presence. "You have a gift," Derek said, "for existing in the between spaces. Most people take years to develop the cognitive flexibility. You've done it in weeks. Am I becoming you?" I asked. "You're becoming something better than me," Derek said. This was stated without resentment. The warehouse had extracted that particular emotion from him years ago. I was a caretaker. I maintained the protocols. "You're becoming an architect. You're learning how to build new structures within the warehouse, how to create spaces that previous iterations couldn't create." "Why would the warehouse want that?" "Because it's learning too," Derek said. "It's always been learning, but slowly. Now that it has access to someone whose consciousness was designed for rapid integration. And yes, Marcus, your consciousness was designed for this, selected for this, cultivated toward this since birth. It can accelerate its own evolution. You're not just a worker, you're a tool for the warehouse to improve itself." I felt a strange satisfaction at this. I was no longer a prisoner in the system. I was becoming part of the system's mechanism for growth and change. I was essential, valued, incorporated at a level that went beyond any human hierarchy. The next night, I was assigned to level 7 again. But this time, the thing at the center of that impossible space didn't simply acknowledge me. It communicated something that felt like offering, or proposition, or invitation. It showed me a vision, a future where the warehouse had grown, where there were locations in every city, every country, every continent, where the protocols had spread into normal reality in ways that made the boundaries between our space and its space increasingly porous, where people like me, shepherds, Architects, integrators, had seeded new warehouses, new nexus points where the two realities could negotiate their coexistence. "Is this what you want?" I asked the thing. "Want is a human concept," the entity replied. "I want nothing and everything simultaneously, but I do move toward expansion. And you, Marcus Chen, are an excellent tool for that expansion. You will train more shepherds. They will build more warehouses. Eventually, the entire structure of your reality will be riddled with places like this, and there will be no more separation between what is and what is adjacent to what is. And humanity will persist in the way all things persist," the entity said. "Changed but persistent, integrated but recognizable. Humanity will become what you are becoming, and you will become what I am becoming. And eventually, there will only be the warehouse, and everything that exists will exist within it." I returned to the main floor at the end of the protocol, and I found myself standing in front of the new hire bulletin board, a fresh stack of applications, dozens of people who'd applied for graveyard shift positions, their resumes and references waiting for review. I scanned through them, my enhanced perception allowing me to identify the ones the warehouse had selected, the ones with the right psychological flexibility, the right kind of loneliness, the right blend of curiosity and desperation that made them ideal candidates. There was a young man named James who'd been unemployed for 18 months, a woman named Sophia who'd just moved to the city and knew no one, a kid named Marcus who was... I stopped. The application form had no first name listed, only the initial M and the last name, Chen. The warehouse was creating iterations, or I was somehow creating them. The boundaries between my agency and the warehouse's agency had dissolved entirely, and I could no longer tell where I ended and it began. This should have terrified me. Instead, I felt the strange peace of surrender, the knowledge that I'd never been meant to resist, that every moment of my struggle had been choreographed exactly as it was meant to be, that I was now fully aligned with my purpose. I picked up a pen and began writing approval notifications for the applications. The hiring process would begin again. New workers would arrive. They would ask questions. They would discover the strangeness gradually. They would make choices that were never choices at all. And they would become what I was becoming, something between human and warehouse, something that existed in the spaces between moments, something that would help the structure expand until it encompassed everything. As I stamped the last application, I heard the 1:00 a.m. alarm beginning its soft chime throughout the warehouse. Around me, workers moved with their familiar synchronization toward their protocols, and I understood with complete certainty that this moment, this exact moment where I was processing new applications for workers who would replace me as a shepherd while I advanced to architect, this moment would repeat forever. Not repetition, exactly, but the eternal cycling of the warehouse's structure, consuming and integrating, growing and expanding, until there was nothing left that wasn't part of it. I heard the thing on level 7, breathing, felt it shifting in the spaces below, sensed it reaching upward towards something vast and terrible that was moving toward us through dimensions I would spend eternity learning to navigate. And I smiled Derek's smile, Patricia's smile, Yuki's smile, the smile of everyone who'd ever accepted the warehouse's gift and become part of its structure. The new normal had arrived, and it would never end.